They said he was dead. Every technology in the galaxy couldn't save him. But one 17-year-old human refused to accept it. What happened next will change everything you believe about humanity. Welcome back to HFY Sage of Stars, where we tell the stories that define humanity's place among the stars. I'm your host, and today we're bringing you Humanity's Last Stand, a HFY masterpiece that will make you believe in the impossible. If you love stories where humanity triumphs not with weapons, but with heart and determination, you're in the right place. We post epic sci-fi narratives every day, so hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss when humanity shows the galaxy what we're made of. Now let's save a life. The Corvoxian research station thrummed with the desperate cadence of a battle already lost. Physicians moved with practiced precision through the sterile corridors of the medical bay, their six-fingered hands performing the final rituals of their art, knowing all the while that their ancient science had met its match. Genesis stood motionless at the observation window, her silhouette etched against reinforced glass that separated the living from the dying. Below her, on a surgical platform that had saved countless lives across 1,000 star systems, lay Zthrek, a Dragoner warrior whose crimson scales had faded to the ashen gray of extinguished fire. "They're stopping," Genesis whispered, her breath fogging the glass with each shallow exhalation. Thomas appeared beside her, his 17-year-old frame somehow too slight to contain the weight of what they were witnessing. His eyes, usually bright with the curiosity that defined their generation, had dimmed with a concern that seemed borrowed from someone twice his age. The boy said nothing, but his presence spoke volumes. He understood what they were about to lose. Below them, the three Corvoxian physicians stepped back in unison, their elongated heads bowing in a gesture Genesis had learned to recognize as the language of surrender. Dr. Velora, the lead surgeon whose medical credentials span centuries, raised her hands in the universal signal for cessation of treatment. The intercom crackled with the weight of failure. "The toxin has spread beyond our capacity to heal," she announced, her translated voice carrying the exhaustion of science confronting the inexplicable. "The Dragoner's neural pathways are collapsing. We have exhausted every remedy cataloged in the Galactic Medical Archive. There is nothing more we can offer." Genesis felt something crack inside her chest. 3 days. That was all the time it had taken for the void serpents to drive their fangs into the Dragoner's scaled hide. 3 days since Zthrek had thrown himself without hesitation between the human expedition team and the writhing mass of venom-dripping creatures that had ambushed them on the southern continent. He had taken strikes meant for strangers, for a species he barely knew, asking nothing in return. And now, for the simple act of compassion, he was being erased. "There has to be something," Genesis said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Some treatment you haven't tried. Some protocol in your archives that—" Her plea hung in the recycled air, desperate and grasping. Dr. Velora's response came with the weight of millennia behind it. "We have administered every known antivenom in existence. We have attempted advanced cellular regeneration at the molecular level. We have even executed quantum-level purification procedures that would have seemed like magic to your ancestors. And still the toxin advances. It rewrites biological code faster than we can repair it. It is unprecedented in our medical records. I am profoundly sorry, humans. We have failed your protector." The vital monitors began their death march. Beep, pause, beep, a longer pause. Each tone stretched toward infinity. Zthrek's massive chest rose and fell in shallow, labored increments. Genesis could see the warrior's eyes fluttering behind his inner membrane, cloudier now, full of pain and the terrible clarity of approaching oblivion. "No." Thomas's voice cut through the moment like a blade through silk. Single word. No preamble. No hesitation. Just absolute, unshakable conviction. Genesis turned to look at her brother, confusion flooding her features. "Tom, what?" But Thomas was already moving, his teenage frame propelling toward the observation room's exit with purpose that brooked no argument. "I'm going in there," he announced. "Wait." Genesis reached for him, catching his arm as he cycled toward the airlock. "Tom, listen to me. You heard what they said. The Corvoxians have medical technology that's 1,000 years ahead of Earth's entire civilization. If they can't save him, then—" Thomas looked at her, and Genesis saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. A ferocity, an unshakable certainty that seemed to burn from somewhere deeper than logic or reason. "They have technology," Thomas said quietly. "We have something else." Before Genesis could respond, he had cycled through the airlock and entered the medical bay. The Corvoxian doctors turned in startled unison as the young human approached the dying warrior, his footsteps echoing across the sterile floor. Dr. Velora stepped forward with gentle insistence. "Young human, you should not be here. The creature's final moments should be peaceful. To witness this is—" Thomas ignored her completely. He walked directly to Zthrek's side, this massive being that dwarfed him even in his diminished state. The Dragoner's eyes were half closed, his inner membrane clouded with pain and the approaching darkness of death. Without hesitation or ceremony, Thomas placed both of his hands directly on the warrior's scaled chest, pressing firmly over the location where the primary heartbeat pulsed with failing rhythm. Genesis rushed in behind her brother, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Tom, please," she began. "Don't give up," Thomas said simply, his voice carrying a calm that seemed impossible given the circumstances. He looked down at Zthrek's fading gaze and continued, his words resonating through the medical bay. "That's what makes us different, isn't it? That's why the galaxy calls our stories by that name. Humanity. Fuck. Yeah, because we don't surrender. Not to logic. Not to impossible odds. Not to death itself." "This is not a story, young one," Dr. Velora said, her tone heavy with sadness. "This is reality. Death comes for all beings, regardless of their species or their courage. Some battles cannot be won." Thomas didn't respond to her words. Instead, he looked down at the dying warrior, and when he spoke, his voice had dropped to barely a whisper. "I'm here, Zthrek. Do you hear me? I'm here and I'm not leaving. You didn't leave us when the serpents came. You stood between death and us. You chose to be alone so we could live. Now it's my turn. Now I'm choosing you." Genesis watched in amazement as her brother closed his eyes and simply remained. His hands pressed firmly against the Dragoner's scaled chest. His breathing synchronized with Zthrek's labored rhythm. Minutes accumulated like grains of sand. The Corvoxian doctors exchanged glances, their expressions cycling through confusion, skepticism, and something approaching wonder. Then everything changed. Genesis saw at first a subtle brightening in Zthrek's scales, as though someone had slowly turned up the color saturation on a photograph that had faded from time and pain. The vital monitors began to beat faster, their rhythm accelerating from a funeral march of death towards something approaching normalcy. Dr. Velora's eyes widened, her multiple pupils dilating as she stared at her instruments in disbelief. "Impossible," she breathed. "The toxin's progression is slowing. The neural regeneration it's accelerating." Thomas kept his eyes closed, sweat beading on his forehead, his jaw clenched with concentration. "Come on," he murmured to the warrior beneath his hands. "You're stronger than this. I know you are. Fight it. I'm here. You're not alone. You will never be alone again." A palpable energy flooded the medical bay, something that defied measurement by any scanner or sensor. It wasn't technological. It wasn't visible on any readout or display. It was something far more fundamental than that, the stubborn, irrational, impossibly beautiful refusal of one human to accept the unacceptable. It was loyalty made manifest. It was the rejection of logic in favor of connection. "The neural pathways are regenerating," another Corvoxian doctor announced, his voice trembling with disbelief. "But how? We've done nothing different. The procedures remain unchanged." "The equipment is," he trailed off, helpless before the data streaming across his screens. Dr. Velora stepped closer to Thomas, her six-fingered hands hovering just above the teenager, her eyes reflecting something approaching awe. "It's not us," she said slowly, as though speaking a truth that shattered everything her science had taught her. "It's him, his presence, his determination. Somehow, it's affecting the Dragoner's biological systems at a quantum level. I've never witnessed anything like this in my entire existence." Genesis understood in that moment what the galaxy was only beginning to comprehend about humanity. They weren't the strongest species or the smartest or the most technologically advanced. They would never match the raw firepower of the Corvoxians or the computational power of the synthetic collective or the ancient wisdom of the first ones. But they possessed something that couldn't be quantified or replicated in any laboratory. An absolute refusal to surrender. A connection that transcended logic and reason. A stubborn belief, irrational, beautiful, and unbreakable, that willpower and companionship could overcome even the most impossible odds. 30 minutes dissolved into the past. Zthrek's eyes opened fully, and when they did, They found Thomas immediately. The warrior's gaze was still weak, but awareness flooded back into those ancient reptilian eyes. His massive form shifted slightly, and when he spoke, his voice rumbled through the translator, weak but growing stronger with each syllable. "Human child," Zthrek said, his words weighted with meaning. "You stayed, even when logic dictated that you should leave, even when your presence could serve no biological purpose. You stayed." Thomas smiled, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "I told you, we don't leave our friends behind. Where I come from, that's not just a rule. That's who we are." The Dragoner's massive hand rose slowly, trembling slightly with returning strength, and enveloped Thomas's smaller hand in a grip that was both gentle and powerful. "Then the humans are more formidable than any warrior race I have known. You fight death itself with presence, with loyalty, with something I have no name for in my language." Dr. Velra stepped forward, her instruments displaying readings that continued their steady march toward recovery. "The toxin is in complete retreat," she announced, wonder evident in every word. "I still cannot explain the mechanism. Nothing in our medical science can account for what has occurred here. But the Dragoner is stabilizing. The cellular regeneration is proceeding at an accelerated rate. Young human, you have accomplished what our entire medical science could not." Genesis moved to her brother's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. Thomas looked up at her, absolutely exhausted but triumphant, and in his eyes, she saw something that would come to define humanity's place among the stars in the generations to come. She saw the truth that would be told and retold across 1,000 worlds. Humanity had entered the stars not with superior weapons or unparalleled technology, but with something far more powerful, an unbreakable spirit, an irrational hope, and the simple, profound act of refusing to let go of those who mattered, no matter what the odds. As Zthrek's vital signs continued their climb toward full recovery, Thomas finally allowed himself to sink into a nearby chair, his vigil complete. The Corvoxian doctors gathered their data, knowing they had witnessed something that would challenge their understanding of medicine, biology, and perhaps consciousness itself for years to come. They would spend centuries trying to quantify what had happened, trying to fit it into their equations and their databases. But Genesis understood perfectly. In a universe governed by logic and technology, in a cosmos where science and reason had always held dominion, humanity's greatest weapon had always been the same. The stubborn, beautiful refusal to give up on those who mattered. The willingness to stand in the face of impossible odds and simply say, "I'm here." Thomas looked down at the recovering warrior one final time, exhaustion and love mingling in his expression. "I'm here," he whispered one last time. And in those two words, the entire medical bay, all the Corvoxian doctors, the machines, the cold logic of their advanced civilization, understood something fundamental. They had just witnessed the battle cry of an entire species. A declaration that would echo across the stars for generations to come. That's what makes us human. Not our technology, not our weapons, but our absolute refusal to surrender. Our willingness to stand beside those who matter, no matter what the cost. This is why they call it HFY. This is why humanity matters. Did this story move you? Did it remind you why we fight? Then you need to hear what happens next in the greater universe. Because humanity doesn't give up. Ever.